VLPSos here. This is a video lesson for Python programming, another format for formatting strings. These videos are intended to be paused so that you can practice. We have a few ways to format strings. And to review those ways, I have three variables: name, age, and height. Name is equal to a string, age is equal to an integer, and height is equal to a float. The first way that we'll review is crude but simple and fast. And that is simply to use commas to concatenate our string. So I've typed print name, then a comma, and the string at. I have to close the string and then use another comma in order to take advantage of printing a variable. Another string, another comma, and variable, another string. And this will format it by attaching the values of the variables to the strings and printing it all as one line. And we can see that happen. Sauce at 47 years is 1.728 meters tall. It's put the string, the integer, and the float together. That's one way of formatting. We have another way of formatting that is used very often by coders. It's very good. It's not ideal, but it's simple enough and it can do enough. And that is using symbols to create one string and then putting the values or replacing the values with at those places that you've used the symbols. So I have print, I'm opening a string, I'm starting with the symbol %s to stand for a string while I finish composing the string itself. %i stands for an integer. At %i years is, and then a %f for a floating value. Closing the string, and then a % with parentheses after to supply the values of the variables that were used. We have to do it in order. The %s comes first, so a string needs to come first, age is an integer which comes second, and then a floating value. This is a way of formatting, and you can see that there was trouble with the float. There was added zeros. And to take care of that, we have another way of formatting which can also give us some control about the space in which things are printed. So this example, the new formatting will give us near total control, and it is the format function that we append to the string in order to use it. I'll provide a simple example with a print line, creating a string. This time, instead of symbols like %s, %i, and %f, we use these French braces or the squiggly parentheses. That will be the location of a variable wherever we use these parentheses. And in this example, it's going to repeat the output that was done before in this new format. That concludes the string, and then I need to supply the values. So that's done now with a dot and a call to the format function, which has argument parameters, and inside the argument parameters of format, I supply the variables that will fill in the parentheses. I can save and run. I get the same formatted string using the same values, but I do not have the extra zeros in the float that the other second style of formatting did. There is much more that we can do with the format. Positions may be controlled. In other words, I'm going to copy this. And in this example, what was inside the parentheses was left blank. That's the simplest use to format. And in that way, if the parentheses are blank, then the position of the variables has to match the position of the parentheses in the string. But we can abandon that. We can change the order of which we use the variables. There are 3 variables and 3 parentheses. If I put the numbers starting 0, 1, and 2, then I am saying that the 0 position or the initial position is the first thing in the list of variables. The number 1 is going to use the variable that is in the first position, which is the second thing. It's a little confusing because the position numbers start with 0. So name is in position 0, age is in position 1, and height is in position 2. That corresponds to the use of these numbers as positional numbers. So the value for name in position 0 will go in this location with the parentheses and its position 0 inside. And we can see in this example that it's going to jumble it up so that the sentence doesn't make sense because we've put the values in different places. But we do have control of that. With formatting, values may be altered. I'm going to take this as an example and copy it. And in this example, the name and age is going to be used, but I'm going to use the age and height. And I'm going to use parentheses as positions. So the age is in position number 0, and it will replace that 0 in that parenthesis. Height is in position number 1, so height is going to go into that parenthesis. The variable value that I'm going to change is name, so I'm going to use the variable name in the parenthesis, and then I'm going to say that name is equal to something different than its value that was defined previously. So name was defined first here. Now when name gets a different value, I can, in a way, override the previous value and get a different sentence that's going to be printed. Now this is useful in formatting because the original value of name is still intact. It only changed it in the format when it was used to print that line, but it didn't alter the actual value of name that the program was assigned. Some more examples. Formatting really helps us with floats. So we can fix the amount of space that a float gets printed in. For example, I'm going to copy this example here, our initial example. I'm going to use the positions 0, 1, and 2, which will be name, age, and height. Height is the value that is of type float. And in this case, I'm going to control the space that the float has to be printed in. So inside the parentheses where I have used that height as in position 2, I also use a colon because I'm going to introduce more formatting. I'm going to use a dot and a 2, which means 2 places after the decimal place, and an F to indicate that it is a float that is going to go there. So this is getting a little abstract. Let's see the effect. Here is the line at which the float's space was controlled. It has a decimal place and 2 places beyond the decimal that it was rounded to. Without that formatting, it would be a 1.728. I could also change the amount of space that the float has to be printed in by changing the number between the F and the dot. If I changed it to a 6, then I could observe the output. Now I can see that this float was forced to be printed in a position where there were 6 places past the decimal place, even if they're unnecessary. Formatting can also help us with alignment of the values of variables in a string. This is especially useful when we want to print something like a data table. I'll provide a very simple example of a crude table. I'm going to use the pipe symbol as a guide bar of sorts. I'm going to put a value in between, and then another value, and a pipe, and another value. The parentheses are going to be replaced with values of variables, and I do that with the format function by a dot format after the string is closed, and the information that I'm going to put in there is going to be from data 1. I'm going to put data 1's value in 3 times. If I ran it now, then it would be a 1, 2, 3 in these 3 positions. It's the same variable being used, so it's going to be the same value. But what we're going to change in this example is how that information is printed or displayed. So I'm going to use the positions, 0, 1, and 2. It's the same value, but this example is showing you and reminding you of the positions, and then a colon. And in this case, the symbol after the colon is how I want it formatted. A caret means centered. It's going to be centered in a space of 8, and then a dot to show how many positions past the decimal point of the float I want. This is fairly abstract, but what this means is the data that is in the 0 position of the list, which is going to be this value, data 1, is going to be formatted so that it is centered in a space of 8. So after the decimal, there are 2 places shown in the float. Let's see that. I can see that space has been created, a decimal place is used, and 2 places passed. Even though the value is an integer, it made it into a float and created 2 zeros after the decimal place to force that formatting. I'm going to copy this formatting and put it into the other 2 positions in my table and change it a little bit. In this case, I'm not going to do center formatting. I'm going to do right side formatting with the greater than symbol. I'm going to change the number of spaces from 8 to 6 so that there's less space, and I'm going to give no space for the float afterwards. In the third, I'm going to use the less than symbol, which is left formatting, and keep the space 8 and get rid of the decimal places and the float. Let's see what this looks like. So here I have the previous example in a space of 8. Here is a space of 6 in which the entire number that is an integer and was not attempted to become a float has been moved in that space to the right. And here I have a similar example, except that it has been moved to the left and the space is greater. It is a space of 8. This formatting can help us with data tables. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the same thing so it has the same formatting in each place, but the data that's used is going to change. And here when we run it, we had an error because I had a typo when I was changing the 3. I had an extra 1 in there. So here we can see something that looks more like a data table with 3 columns and 3 rows. And the formatting is the same in each column, so you can see how different numbers behave. The format function does a whole lot more. The alignment symbols are caret and then the greater than and less than. Now you. You have seen how strings can be modified and formatted with the format method, which includes some ways to handle float data. Write a simple program that creates a few float values of varying lengths, like the above example, but displays them in a table where their decimal points are aligned. Use the format method. In the output here, we had something very similar to what you are asked to do, but the decimal places are not aligned. Maybe you can work out how to do that.